Hello and welcome to this special segment of the Business Standard Morning Show. I have two very eminent panelists here with me. Let me first introduce Mr. Arun Maira, who was a member of the Planning Commission from 2009 to 2014, before which he was the chairman of BCG India. And he also spent about 25 years with the Tata Group in various capacities. My second guest today is Mr. Amit Tandon, and I'll be addressing him as Amit. Amit is the founder and managing director of the Institutional Investor Advisory Services India Limited, which he started, I think, in 2011. Am I right, Amit?
That's right.
Right. And before that, he was the managing director of Fitch Ratings for India and Sri Lanka. So the topic we have today is the relationship and equation between company boards, CEOs, and founders. The trigger, of course, was the experience that OpenAI went through in the last few days when its founder, Sam Altman, was fired on a Friday, and by Tuesday night, he was reinstated. And on the other side of the coin, the board that had fired Sam found itself out in the doldrums. I think only one member of the original board survived in the reconstituted one that Sam Altman came back to. Now, that puts Sam Altman in a very unique position, not only in the Silicon Valley, but in the corporate sector and startup sector around the world, because he comes in a position which is near impregnable. More than 90% of the employees threatened to resign in the wake of his ouster, which shows, enormous support from the rank and file. The board, the new board, I suppose, would be far more pliant with Mr. Altman's ideas. At the same time, Sam Altman is leading a company that is at the forefront of artificial intelligence development and evolution in the world. And AI, as all of us would know, is a highly exciting subject, but it's also a bit frightening. In fact, only a few months ago, about 40 tech CEOs wrote an open letter saying that there should be a pause on its development until we figure out how to do it safely and securely for mankind. And you all know Harari, who's a philosopher and historian. He has also said that AI has emerged as a threat to humanity. So, given this context, and given the fact that India is in a unique position where we have companies that are more than 100 years old and we have a thriving startup sector, in this evolving situation, what should be the role of boards across companies? How can they carry out their duties responsibly and in a manner that is accountable and transparent, while making sure that the founder or CEO, in some cases, it will be the same person, they also conduct themselves in the manner that is expected of them. Let me start with Mr. Myra, who has a wealth of experience and as a busy columnist and author, he has touched upon this subject also in the recent past, as has Amit, in fact. Amit is a columnist with Business Standard, in fact, and he also recently wrote about how a divorce can affect governance and other issues at a company. So, Mr. Myra, let me start with you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for inviting me. You're quite right. We are at a point in the history of economics and the history of humanity where we've got to improve the governance of corporations to serve the needs of humanity. Let me explain. Corporate governance, the idea of a separate limited liability company, separate meaning it is separated from all the liabilities that a common citizen of society has, but is left free within that boundary of limited liability to produce more returns more efficiently for its investors. And of course, the genesis of the corporate design and governance design is the East India Company in 1600, where you create a vehicle into which investors can put their money, and the board's responsibility is just to ensure that that money is properly accounted for and the profits out of that money are equitably distributed amongst the investors. This remains the prime responsibility, or perhaps even the only responsibility, of modern corporate boards, to ensure that they delivered against the expectations of investors, both with respect to the distribution of profits, as well as transparency in giving information. We've created stock exchanges, and they have their regulations, and SEBI is here in India. And that's what the stock regulators focus on. That are you keeping accounts accurately, and therefore audits and so on? Are you, giving information that the investors need, and has become now like every quarter officially, and in between also, whereas previously perhaps it was once a year. So the entire focus of the board is to satisfy the needs of investors for profit and for information. Even before we had the matter of something like AI, which can destroy humanity if it's left loose in the hands of people who only want to make money out of it. We had corporations being charged that you're using public lands. We're giving you lands to produce, put up a plant, and in the process, what you're doing is destroying the habitats nearby, and the people's lives are affected. So there's been a big demand that corporations should be accountable for more than just producing profits and accountable only to their shareholders. They must be accountable to society. They must be accountable to society. So the big movement of reforming corporate governance for the last 20, 30 years, broad movement, has been how do you get scorecards which express the corporate performance, not only with respect to shareholders' profit, but with respect to the environment and with respect to society also. At the same time, legally, though, a board can be sued by investors, as is done quite often, that they were not discharging their fiduciary responsibilities. They were seeming to be too kind to other considerations and not helping companies' management, guiding the company's management to produce more profits for the investors. And so in this case, they did create, because one of the early investors, Elon Musk and some others, felt that we want to give money for good research, for something which will help humanity, but we want to make sure that it's done not for profit. It's done not for profit, and we want to give money to the researchers and managers and in the company to do something which would benefit humanity. So they weren't denying them money. You can have the money, but do it for this purpose. Now, when they needed more money to do their research, then you need to go to other investors. And so they created two vehicles, and this is, you can explain more, Amit can do that even better. There is now a company that is for profit, and then there's this overall supervisory board, as it will, who's to ensure that that profit-making company also doesn't cause harm to society. So in this dilemma, what does the board do? What does the board do? They are not required to, from what they were set up for, to comply only with the usual stock market and financial market expectations of responsibility. They have broader responsibilities to society. And there's a dilemma, because fiduciary and as per the market's expectations, they should be just concentrating on enabling the management to get on with the big job of making more profits for the investors.
Yes, yes. Very interesting. In fact, this for-profit and not-for-profit is a point I would like to come back to later in our discussion. Meantime, let me invite Amit to weigh in with his initial remarks. And Amit, if you could kindly also cover what should be the investor's approach to such a situation. And these may not necessarily be investors who are big enough to have board positions or sway the company in any way, but the chota mota investors as well.
Thanks for inviting me for the show, and it's a pleasure to be and sharing the platform with Mr. Maira. I'll actually begin with where Mr. Maira left off, which is kind of talking about a board which is for a board and an entity which is for profit, and another entity which is a not for profit. And what strikes me in this whole thing is that we've had the Tatas who've been doing it for over 120 years. So you have the Tata Trusts, which have a motive which is quite different from that of some of the other companies, manufacturing companies and other businesses which are there, which are for profit. And What they, I think, very cleverly or very, well, let me just for now say very cleverly did was, and I'm not saying that in the bad sense of the word, but in the positive sense, what the Tatas did was they kind of put in Tata Sons as the go in between. So Tata Sons was managing
Yes.
whatever the operating companies were doing. And the money which was then being collected by Tata Sons was being dividended off to the trusts, who then used it for their various altruistic motives. And I thought that was, to my mind, a pretty attractive and a pretty good structure. Maybe there is a lesson in all this, because one of the things which is responsible for Sam Altman's firing has been the fact that, the board, I must confess that the board has been reasonably vague in terms of why they sacked him.
Oh, very vague, very
Like
vague.
his
Yes.
style, or there were some other issues. So therefore, in the absence of clarity, they've kind of just said that, look, there wasn't, they weren't really clear in terms of what he was saying and what he was doing, and maybe they felt there were some contradictions in terms of the companies need to balance the two. So it could be that, look, there's a product which was for the benefit of humanity. I put that in quotes, and then there's this
Mhm.
commercial motivation, and so Sam Altman was trying to balance it. So, of course, one of the issues is in the absence of knowing why they sacked him, what happened. It wasn't something which was clearly articulated. We
Yes.
have to presume that it's just his inability to kind of manage the contradiction. It also brought about the fact, as you pointed out, Suveen, in your opening remarks, that it's highly unusual to find that pretty much 3/4 of the employees kind of saying that, look, we are ready to resign if the ex-CEO is not brought back. I've not actually come across any other such instances. It may have
Yeah,
happened.
isn't it unique? Yes.
It may have happened in some companies, but I haven't seen that happen in such a high-profile instance. And these included the person who was made the interim CEO, as well as one of the board
Yes.
members who was responsible for the sacking. So it's
Correct.
all fairly unusual. Let's suffice it to say that, look, there was a path, and there was a belief that, Sam Altman had defined the course the company would take, what the future direction was. There were certain contradictions, no doubt, which the board saw. And the view was that, look, maybe the view was they will get balanced and addressed along the way. And that could be one of the things which they're expecting that the new board will do, which is balance these contradictions between the profit motive and the need for more and more capital to invest in R&D, with that of the do no harm motivation which the company started with.
Yes.
Mm.
In fact, what we do know is that the board accused Altman of not communicating enough with the board about where the company was going.
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
That's it, I think. But Suveen, we are hitting the nail on the head.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. How much should an investor's rights prevail because the
Yes.
investor put large amount of money with respect to the needs of other stakeholders of putting no money in the company? I'm talking about the public at large. So use
Yes.
example, and I'm glad that Amit brought up Tatas, and
Yes.
being familiar with the Tata setup then and now too. See, we have an instance where, again, a very high profile CEO who happened to be the successor to Ratan Tata was fired. And again,
Yes.
market and everybody was surprised. And I think till this day, we wonder what really went on. I mean, different versions have been put out. What
Yes.
really went on? What really went on? And so, what was the structure there? The structure was that Tata Sons is not a majority shareholder. Tata Sons is
Yes.
not a majority shareholder of any of the Tata companies.
Correct.
So only some of the profits of the companies go up to Tata Sons into the trust to do social work or whatever they wish to
Yes.
do. That is a particular investor's choice. So what they want to do with their money after the company has made the money. And Tata's, since the time of the Monopolies Trade Commission, where it was clear that the groups must be broken up, Yeah, and these holding
Yes.
companies or managing agencies on behalf of the holding companies cannot be managing the companies. Each company's got its own set of stakeholders, and its board is accountable to its set of stakeholders. And his annual general meetings and reports are not to Tata Sons, they are to its shareholders. And the CEOs
Yes.
of the companies, managing directors under the Indian corporate law, must be left free to, while taking into account all the various investors' needs. Tata Sons may have some requirements to be kind to society, but many others, most others, or all others, are putting their money to get some money out of Tata's, that
Yes.
company there. So there is a conflict, if you will, of values or interest amongst the investors, possibly. And so the CEO has to balance out all these things and then take decisions. Now, what happened in that case with Ratan Tata and the Mistry, different things are being said. And one of the things is what Amit has said in respect to Sam Altman, that it is said that Tata Sons, the directors of Tata Sons on the board, not the directors of Tata Sons on the board, but Tata Sons said Mistry wasn't keeping them fully informed. And they didn't
Yes.
know the reasons why he was going after selling off some parts of this, that, and the other. And he wasn't keeping them fully informed. But it comes back to the structure. We come back to the structure of good governance. The Tata Sons being a shareholder and creating a trust is not solving the problem of whether Tata Sons is doing, Tatas are doing the right things by all stakeholders in society. That is done by what the board allows the management of each separate company to do. And it is true within the Tata Group that some companies have a better reputation of being trustworthy, of caring for society and the environment than some other companies have. Okay. Tata Sons is
Yes.
trying to make all of them live by that ethic because the value of the Tata name in markets and to society. So they've created vehicles. Ratan Tata was very good at creating those vehicles, or they then sharing ethics discussions amongst themselves, training ethics officers for each of their companies, quality officers, and so on. So creating these soft vehicles through which Tata Sons could enable the companies to exercise the values that Tata Sons hopes that the managements will. But Tata Sons cannot control them because those boards must be free to take decisions which suit all their investors, not just Tata Sons. And so
Yes.
they are judged in the stock markets by the stock markets in the same ways that Reliance would be judged. Stock markets wouldn't care probably whether Tata Sons is spending more money on CSR or less money. In fact, the history is that when Tata Steel, the largest company of Tata's, became, borrowing money abroad and getting investors from abroad, became an international
Yes.
steel company with international stakeholders as well as some international employees also. The
Yes.
experience that the CEOs of Tata Sons, Tata Steel had in responding to the quarterly calls of investors from Wall Street is something worth noting. Because in the first time that the new CEO, that was Muthuraman, after the 2000 started, went on to a quarterly call, a young analyst sitting in New York in Wall Street on behalf of the analysts, Tata Steel used to have this slogan. It's a good advertising slogan to get the confidence of the public in India and society that, and we also make steel.
Yes.
Okay,
Tata
and
Steel.
they used to put out the stories about how they care for people, communities, environment.
It was
Uh,
called Tisco in those days, I think.
Tisco, it was called exactly Tisco and Tata Steel. And this young analyst, and Mr. Muthuraman's first quarterly call, where he's not experienced this,
Mm-hmm.
the sharpness, the financial sharpness and focus of a financial analyst. He says, Mr. Muthuraman, when is Tata Steel or Tisco going to stop being a socialist company and be a genuine capitalist one? Mr.
Yeah.
Muthuraman, I was then a consultant with the BCG and he was my friend from before.
Were
So
you
he says, you've
were,
been to invest.
were you present in this meeting when the
No,
analyst
no, no,
raised?
no. He after that, because I had just come back from America where I was a consultant for 10 years too. So I was familiar with, how investors would be expecting a CEO. So it's like a coach, like he turned to me, he says, you please explain to me. You've grown up with the Tata values and you
Yes.
also know how markets operate and what is expected of a CEO. I was given this question, what do I do?
What was your advice?
No, I
What
said,
was your advice?
Muthuraman, you can't change it by yourself unless the markets generally change their expectations of what they want from the companies in which they invest. If they don't start becoming investors who also care for society, you're not going to be able to escape this. So it's the governance rules legally that will have to be reformed. You will have to keep complying with what the stock market asks you. You must. We must keep ensuring that the markets don't turn us off, don't turn off from us. And we don't need too much from them, because we'll also be judicious in how we use capital, and we will give profits. But again, the profits will not be the greedy profits that, when investors are loosened from the feeling that it's only for them that the company is created, and not realizing that the company actually is a social entity.
Yeah, very interesting. In fact, I would like to draw Amit into this discussion as well. Talking about social welfare and other things that Tata Steel used to, pat itself on the back for. I have heard a lot of CEOs and business promoters tell me that my job is to make money, make profits, so that all our stakeholders, direct as well as indirect, benefit from the company. Now, additionally, if I want to do some social welfare, that is separate. But my primary job is to run the company well. So that is where this, we also make steel kind of thing was a bit running thin. Amit, what is your view on this?
Yeah, so look, if you think about it, for a long time, the whole thought process was that the business of business is business. And it was kind of very narrowly defined as, profit maximization and maximization for the benefit of shareholders. Now, I'd like to believe that it was a misreading of Friedman, because what Friedman has actually argued in the op-ed column through which this whole thing took gained currency was the fact that, look, after taking into account the interests of all the other stakeholders, and this is something which has kind of got clarified over the years. So if you look at our Companies Act of 2013, they said the board needs to look at what is in the interest of all stakeholders. They've been very clear. They've not said shareholders. They've said all stakeholders. If you look at the US Business Council, which is what has been something which has kind of, again, gained a lot of currency, has been the fact they spoke about the fact that business needs to take into account all the interest of all stakeholders. And in a sense, this whole shift to ESG and to stewardship, sustainability and stewardship, rests on the back of this whole thinking that, look, it's all very well to think about shareholders, but you need to kind of take a broader look and say that, look, the function that the business operates in society, and therefore it needs to kind of look after the interests of the broader societal goals which are there. Of course, there has been some amount of backlash, but that is because, you take anything to its extreme, you will find that there is going to be some pushback. But yeah, this is where we are. If you kind of look at our some of our regulations, there is this whole thing on companies spending a little bit on CSR. It again comes from the fact that, look, companies have a responsibility not just to their shareholders, but also to the communities in which they serve. And it's kind of now reasonably well established that it is there. But look, for boards, it's a very difficult balancing act in terms of where does, once you kind of have multiple goals, which is the one you maximize. So the the advantage which profit maximization gave was that there was a sharper focus on one matrix, rather than say that, look, you're going to focus on a number of things. And therefore, the criticism is that, look, if you want to do many things, you don't achieve any, as against that. What you started off with, that, look, if you focus on maximizing profits, you maximize profits. If you've got surplus left over, you can decide what you want to do with it. So, but yeah, those are the two arguments. But I kind of tend to be a little bit more in the stakeholder versus on the stakeholder side, in the stakeholder versus shareholder debate. And what I'd like to believe is the original thinking of Friedman, and not the misinterpreted reading of Friedman.
Now, is there something that the OpenAI board could have done differently, apart from the better communication and better preparation and information, etc., etc. In its approach, in its attitude to artificial intelligence as well as to the CEO, could the board have been different?
No, so I think we are again avoiding the point. It's about the design of the governance and the responsibilities that the law and society the board. Okay,
Okay.
it comes to that. So looking at the history and
Yes.
not going into the economics and what Friedman said and how it's been interpreted, I do
Mhm.
know that. But the point is
Mhm.
giving teeth to people's ideologies and intentions. So the teeth that is given to any ideology or belief is by what the law requires you to do, right?
Right.
So the law gives it teeth. Otherwise, you can keep saying, this is what we expect of you. So coming to the Indian history itself, we
Mhm.
did realize, I'm saying it's not just Tatas, but society was saying that in India, after we let loose through
Yes.
liberalization and started adopting the Western forms of analysis of companies' performance and accountabilities and reporting to the shareholders. And we had to, start accepting American Sarbanes-Oxley types of thing because, our companies had to be reporting there too. So it comes
Yes.
clear that our companies began to feel, and society began to feel that we need to develop our own framework. And our
Okay.
own framework will comply with what everywhere in the world people are saying, that companies are not seen to be accountable, not seen to be accountable to other
Mhm.
stakeholders as much as they're seen to be accountable only to shareholders. It's because of the frequency with which they account to and the accuracy and the details with which they account to only shareholders. They're not accounting to the rest of us with
Okay.
any standards established, and then someone auditing that what they're reporting is accurate and not just their greenwashing statements of intentions. So in India, a voluntary movement was created with leading corporate houses, and Tata's was one of them, and
Mhm.
assisted by international reporting organizations like GRI, to
Mhm.
let's develop national voluntary guidelines. And the Indian Corporate Ministry, which having come to the Planning Commission, it was one of the ministries that I was expected to oversee with respect to what they are doing, not the details of what they do. So this
Mhm.
ministry, good thing, they also joined that effort because they were required to rethink the corporate governance requirement standards in India, while
Mhm.
accepting and understanding that they can't be very far off from the international standards. So in that process, they came up, this whole group, along with, I'm saying, government support, with a national voluntary guidelines. But
Mhm.
in the month in which the national voluntary guidelines were to be, and the companies asked this, though this is all voluntary and this is best international standards and so on, we would like governments to at least bless it and say, this is government supported national voluntary guidelines. Hmm?
Right.
And the next step from that would have been, obviously, that some regulators, maybe SEBI, and it has turned out to be SEBI quite well, actually, that SEBI should start expanding because it's got the teeth, to criticize boards, fire boards, and all that, to
Yes.
impose on boards these additional reporting requirements. SEBI should, as part of the teeth and constitutional powers it's been given, require this to happen. So,
O-
but SEBI needs a guidance from the government, right? The
Okay.
corporate law ministry, that should we now be, changing what has been expected to of us in terms of the broad frameworks. And so
Mhm.
at that moment, government didn't do this. And what did government do instead? They announced a 2% CSR law. So the history of
Yes.
it was very interesting. How did that come when this other thing was going on? It's similar to what you're saying. It was surprising
Yes.
to many people that when all this has been the public discourse and months and months have been spent debating
Mhm.
the details, comparing, testing out with corporations and SEBI's involvement, how come suddenly you decided not to endorse this? And
Mhm.
because by law, that 2% of the profits, net profits, if you make profits,
Yes.
2% shall be given to, and they specified what the things could be. So
Right.
this people then characterize it, that this you've done is creating a temple where at
Mhm.
the end of the week they can put on their dhotis and give some offerings in the temple with whatever sins are committed during the weak, in fact, forgive them because I made so much money, I can give you more offering in the temple at the end of it. Characterization. So the
Yes.
ethical responsibility that companies had in their operations,
Yes.
they were being excused for and saying, put some money at the end of it. And then people said, then why don't you just tax them? And government is supposed to do the social work and not companies. Increase the tax by 2% and do it. And don't, bother them with, accounting and reporting, all this separate things on the side. So you can see where it comes to uh, the expectations of a company actually being responsible to a larger set of stakeholders and then giving it maybe a legal requirement to account to the others also accurately by standard frameworks and not you choose your own ones. Some say we do ESG, some say we balance scorecards, and everybody's confused. Do I really know how we are
Okay.
better than the others?
Okay. So what about the legal structure of corporations and fiduciary responsibility of boards? Is there a case to take another look at these things?
It is happening. I mean, you talk about social enterprises, which is the current big thing.
Yes.
I must say that in the G20, there were a lot of different. There was a B20, which was led by CII and others, and then there's been, of course, things on the T20 and Women's 20 and
Yes.
Y20 and Environment 20 and so on. And
Yes.
you just see the Business 20 came out with a statement, and Amit, of course, knows it, and it says so that it follows the tradition. It says from the Cadbury's report to Sarbanes-Oxley, so on advance, but within that same tradition.
Okay.
Whereas the others are saying, since corporations are the biggest creators of wealth in economies, right? And they are trillion-dollar sizes larger than countries. We need them to take more responsibility for everything, not just for the results for their shareholders. And
Right.
therefore, they have been saying, the others, that look, this whole matter coming up again, that corporations' role must be redefined. You cannot
Yes.
say that we've got the most powerful thing in the vehicles, institutions of the economy, which are accountable only to investors. I mean, therefore, the economy will keep causing harm to
Right.
society, to the
Right.
environment.
Right. Let me pull in Amit here. Amit, apart from your thoughts on this, would you also like to touch upon the role of independent directors, how their role is evolving, and what should be really done to make them not only more empowered but also more capable in terms of training and qualifications, etc., etc. Amit?
Yeah, look, first, let me very quickly come back. And I kind of agree with what Ms. Maira said, that in
Mm.
terms of, what the role of the board and what the expectation is kind of pretty much driven from the structure of the organization. So if it is a not-for-profit, they would have completely different motives. So at one level, I do have a lot of empathy with them. Now we can, you know, choose to disagree with what the outcome, or what happened, how they behaved, etc., etc. But there is an argument to be made for what they did was, given the circumstances and given the boundary conditions under which they were acting, was the right thing to do. The fact that it's kind of had it kind of spun out of control, and therefore they had no control over what happened and over the subsequent developments is a completely different matter. Look, in terms of what the role of the independent director is, again, we kind of have to contextualize it. And again, picking up from what Mr. Maira had said, when he spoke about the fact that a lot of what we do with regard to corporate governance are ideas which we've kind of borrowed from other markets. And that is the fact that, that whole primacy of the board is something which we've looked at from the global markets. And that is because there was an absence of a controlling shareholder or a promoter, as we call them in India. And in the absence of a controlling shareholder or a promoter, what you had was you had a set of shareholders who gave money, who invested in the company, and they kind of turned to the board to be
Right.
responsible for ensuring that they hired the right CEO, they fired the wrong CEO, they kind of make the right acquisitions, they make the right guide through the right capital allocation decision, and kind of provide the right checks and balances. In India,
Right.
you had about own 50-60% of the equity. And therefore, you would expect that there is a greater alignment of interest between the small shareholder or the minority investor and that of the controlling shareholder. And therefore, the roles and responsibilities of the board, including that of the independent directors, will change.
Right.
Now, there are different people who will define it differently. One is to say that, look, as an independent director, you're supposed to arbitrate between the interests of the controlling shareholder and the minority shareholders and other stakeholders and ensure that there's a right balance which is struck. To the other extreme, where you say that, look, the role of the independent director is to save the promoters from themselves.
Okay.
Because we've seen that they have taken extreme positions and oftentimes run the companies to the ground. So I would kind of say that it's much more, these others saying that you are kind of balancing the interest of the majority investor with that of the other shareholders is a very big role. The other is to, again, as I just mentioned, save the promoters from themselves. You have to give them the right advice, and you are supposed to tell them this is where they draw the line, and this is what you believe is in the interest of the company.
Right. But Amit, tell me, is it trickier for the board if the founder or CEO also happens to be a celebrity? Because Mr. Altman was a global celebrity. A day before his firing, he was speaking at this Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum, talking about the future of AI, meeting UK Prime Minister, meeting the US President, So how
Sure,
does
it
the
can
board?
be easy. So it actually depends a lot on the, what the board is on the other side. So if you had a board which had people, and here if you kind of go back, the board was dominated by people who weren't running public companies or who weren't, did not have, as you say, the same stature. But if you have a board with people who have similar stature, if you have people who are, more, and not necessarily in this case, but what we keep saying is that you have to have someone from the industry, you had to have someone who's run a profit and loss account, you have to have someone who can kind of stand up to the CEO. I'm not saying there's a confrontational relationship, but just the fact that, they kind of then they know that if there is the CEO can't ramrod them with whatever they want, then that's those are the kind of checks and balances you want on the other side. But to just assume that, look, because you've got a strong CEO or a global celebrity, or in some cases a narcissistic CEO, means that the board, and I'm not saying Sam Altman is, I'm just kind of looking at what we kind of experience and see. Just because of that, it does not mean that the board cannot build sufficient guardrails to ensure that the CEO does not function like, let me say, a normal CEO will.
Yeah, Mr. Maira would have a lot of experience with celebrity CEOs.
Not just that, as an independent director, and I've been on
Yes.
boards of all our best companies in India and some outside. And this is the challenge the independent director has, that as you say, I'm independent from whom?
From
Just
whom?
from the
Yes.
promoter, or I'm independent from the whole management who are, so devoted to producing profits, because that is what the management is charged for. I am representing not minority shareholders only, I'm representing society at large. And therefore, in our law also, we thought this is the role independent directors would play. They're representing society. But yes, because the legal structure is what it is, as Amit has said, and in our case, because there are very powerful owners, the independent director does have a hard time vis-a-vis the owner. And it could be both ways. If the independent director feels that the owner is not concentrating enough on making good profits, he should also stand up to this owner. If the independent director feels that the company as a whole and the big owner is just making more profits for himself for themselves and paying himself more, and his CEO is becoming astronomical, shouldn't the independent director wake up and say, who's getting the benefits of these proceeds? And this is what's happening in India, as is happening abroad. The salaries of CEOs and the stock options they're given and the terms on which are not fair to other investors also.
Correct.
You are milking a company of which you are just supposed to be an agent of it. And so you see the other thing. It's what and that comes to the celebrity part. Most of our celebrity CEOs make a heck of a lot of money. And they get celebrated because they're so wealthy. They may not be any good, actually, but they are so wealthy.
That's right.
How do they make their wealth? It's not by running a good company, but by taking most of it for themselves.
Since you mentioned salaries, also the gap between the top salaries and the bottom salaries.
It has gone up in India. 300 times, it's now 350 compared to 20 before the liberalization when I was working with Tatas. Today, there was a woman from a part of the G20 discussion. We're having the concluding discussions of how to reconcile the economy with the needs of society. And she mentioned a startling figure about in the US, but she was going back to the 1970s before sort of Friedman let loose and Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. And she said some number like it's 1,000 times higher. I said, gosh.
I think Amit was trying to say something. Amit, come in, please.
No, it's the same thing. Just echoing what Mr. Maira said, which is that, the increase in salary is much more than the increase in top line and bottom line of companies over, you look at it over 3 years, 5 years, 7 years. That's what we see.
Yes. Yeah, so this has been a fascinating discussion, but I'm afraid if we go any further, it will become too long to be usable, and my editors are going to curse me. So to round things up, let me invite both you gentlemen for parting shots. Amit, since you are already on the bigger screen here, let me request you for parting shots before we close.
No, I think it's been a good discussion. I'm really nothing much to add at this stage, but I'm going to give this a pass.
Okay, Mr. Maira.
Right now the big buzzword is social enterprises.
Yes.
Okay, and we're wanting social enterprises means people who created an enterprise for a social purpose and they're demonstrating it's for a social purpose, but who need more money to grow their enterprise, to connect with the stock exchange. So we're defining a social stock exchange. And it's important to see the different values that govern the social side and the stock exchange side. The stock exchange side is governed by valuations, financial valuations. The social side is governed by human values. And so we are finding it, this is the thing. We've got to define, is a social enterprise an enterprise which is primarily to produce goodness for society by creating jobs also, etc. and etc. And that's the prime purpose. And it produces economic benefits alongside. Or is a social enterprise primarily an economic enterprise, which hopefully will produce some social benefits on the side? I mean, CSR 2% and all, but generally something on the side. So what is the purpose of this institution? It's a very powerful institution. It's given a lot of freedoms and presently has a lot of resources, this companies, corporations. What is their purpose in society and the economy today? This is an existential question in the 21st century.
Right. So this has been absolutely mesmerizing and very educating for me personally as well. I think the crux of the matter, the ultimate question we are looking at here is, why does a company exist?
Mm-hmm.
In the context of society, public at large, and given that, in defining the purpose of a company and its attitude to society and social welfare, what should be the role of the board, the role of regulators, and how can the government pitch in? Right?
Very
Mr.
good.
Maira, Amit, it has been very rewarding. Like I said, absolute pleasure. Thank you both for your time and interest in this. I think we should do this again soon. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Amit. A pleasure to be with you.
Bye.
Thank you.
If you like this video, share it and subscribe to Business Standard. For more news, views and insights, log on to www.business-standard.com. Do also follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Telegram and LinkedIn.
She's working her way to the corner office. Business Standard.